There's this fortress of stone that's been looming over a neighborhood in Philadelphia since, get this, 1829. And it wasn't just any old prison. No, it was this grand experiment in justice. But, and this is a big but, the experiment went horribly, horribly wrong. And a lot of people believe the suffering that happened there, well, it never really left. So let's dive into the super dark history of the Eastern State Penitentiary and maybe, just maybe, the ghosts that it created.
So you have Charles Dickens, right? A guy who literally wrote the book on the darkest, grimiest parts of society. And even he was completely horrified by this place. I mean, when that guy says something is worse than any torture of the body, you really have to stop and think. It tells you something was deeply, deeply wrong here. Now, today, this prison is famous. It's known as one of the most haunted places in all of America. But the big question is, why? What on earth happened inside those walls to leave a scar so deep it's still felt today?
And the stories people tell, wow, they're all over the place, but they're so chillingly consistent. We're talking about shadow figures darting down hallways, creepy cackling coming from an empty cell block. People even see tormented faces on the walls. There's talk of a ghostly guard still on watch, and even a famous mobster being tormented by the ghost of someone he killed. But here's the thing, these aren't just random campfire stories. To really get why this place is so haunted, you have to go back. You have to understand the history that cooked all this up.
All right, so let's get into the solitary experiment. Believe it or not, this whole thing started with a really noble idea, a revolutionary one even. We're talking late 1700s, and some of the biggest minds in Philadelphia, we're talking Benjamin Franklin was in this group, they had this vision. They thought, hey, what if prisons weren't just cages? What if they could be places for actual reform? An Eastern state, that was going to be their masterpiece.
And at the heart of it all was this concept they called the Pennsylvania system. The whole theory, which was based on Quaker ideology, was pretty simple. You take a criminal, you put them in complete and total solitary confinement, just them and a Bible. The idea was that with all that quiet time, they'd have no choice but to reflect on what they did, to feel remorse, and to become penitent. That's actually where the word penitentiary comes from. So see, the goal wasn't really punishment. It was supposed to be all about redemption.
But, well, here's where the ideal just smacks right into a brick wall of reality. That beautiful idea of quiet reflection and penitence, it completely fell apart. In practice, it became a nightmare of psychological torment. Solitude didn't create saints. For so many inmates, it just led straight to insanity. It was a total disaster.
And you won't believe the lengths they went to enforce this total isolation. I mean, this place was state-of-the-art when it opened in 1829. It had central heating and flushing toilets before the White House did. But every single feature was designed for one thing: solitude. The cells had these vaulted ceilings with a single skylight, which they called the Eye of God, to remind inmates they were always being watched. If an inmate ever left their cell, they had to wear a hood over their heads so they couldn't see or be seen by anyone. The guards even wore cloth booties over their shoes, just to keep things completely, utterly silent. The silence was the point.
So, as you can probably guess, this grand experiment failed. Miserably. The psychological toll on the inmates was just immense. And when they inevitably started to break from the constant strain, talking to themselves, tapping on the walls, anything to break the silence, the response wasn't help. It was pure cruelty. That lofty ideal of penance and reform just spiraled down into punishment. Brutal, awful torture. Okay, let's talk about some of these punishments. First up, the water bath. If you broke the rule of silence, especially in the dead of winter, you could get this. They'd dunk you in a bath of ice-cold water, then hang you up on a wall, outside, all night. Ice would literally form on your skin. A lot of guys just didn't make it to the morning. Then you have something called the mad chair. Now, the logic behind this was twisted. They had this idea that you could cure mental illness by restricting blood flow. So they would strap prisoners into this chair so tightly that their circulation was just completely cut off. They'd be left there for days with no food. And as you can imagine, the lack of blood flow often led to gangrene. People lost limbs because of this thing. But maybe the most horrific of all was the iron gag. Just listen to this. It was an iron device they would force into an inmate's mouth right over their tongue. Then it was chained to their wrists, which were shackled behind their back. So if you moved your arms even a little bit, trying to get comfortable, the chain would pull and the gag would just tear your tongue and cheeks to shreds. It's not a story. We know for a fact that at least one inmate, a man named Matthias Mecumsey, actually bled to death from this thing back in 1833. So, This is the point where the hard, documented history starts to get really blurry and the stories of hauntings begin. When you think about that level of intense, unimaginable suffering, is it really any surprise that people believe something got left behind? What's really freaky is how the specific ghost stories seem to line up so perfectly with the prison's dark, dark past.
And yeah, the activity isn't just in one spot, it's all over the place. People hear loud, disembodied cackling in cell block 12, which, by the way, was known for some of the most violent riots. You've got the shadow figures that people constantly see in cell block 6. There's even the ghost of a guard who seems to still be standing watch in his tower. It's like every report is a little echo of the pain that's soaked into these walls.
And get this, not even the prison's most famous inmate was safe. We're talking about Al Capone. Now, he lived in what you'd call relative luxury for a prison cell, but even he was reportedly terrified. Other inmates said they could hear him screaming in his cell at night, begging the ghost of a man named Jimmy, probably James Clark, a victim from the St. Valentine's Day massacre, to just leave him alone. They say that ghost haunted him for the rest of his days.
And don't think these are all just old stories from 100 years ago. Nope. As recently as the 1990s, a locksmith named Gary Johnson was just doing his job. He was working on an old lock in cell block 4 when he had this absolutely terrifying experience. He said he was suddenly hit by this powerful negative force, and then he saw these tormented faces literally appearing on the walls. And to top it off, he saw a dark shadow figure leap across the block. This was a regular guy just trying to fix a lock.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? We have this place that was built on a really flawed idea. We have a history packed with unbelievable psychological and physical torture. And we have decades and decades of consistent ghost stories. And it all comes down to one last, really sobering piece of data.
Over 1,000. That's the number. More than 1,000 deaths were officially recorded in the prison's own logbooks over the 142 years it was open. Think about that. 1,000 lives that ended inside those walls, from disease, suicide, murder, and yes, torture. That's 1,000 stories of pure suffering.
So that brings us to the final, really unsettling question, doesn't it? When a place has been soaked in that much pain, that much fear, and that much madness for that long, can all that energy just vanish when you lock the doors for the last time? Or does it actually stain the very stones? Does it leave behind echoes, just waiting for someone to come along who's quiet enough to listen?